Have you ever had someone in your life who was suddenly gone? No message, no goodbye, no explanation. One day they were laughing with you, sharing dreams, making plans, and the next, silence. A kind of silence that burns. You check your phone, you scroll through your chats, you wonder what went wrong. But there's nothing, just an empty space where someone once existed. We call it disappearing, ghosting, walking away. But what's really behind it? Why do people just vanish without a trace? Let's go deep into the mind of those who suddenly disappear, and you might see more than just their absence. You might see their pain. You see, when someone disappears, it often has very little to do with you. It's a mirror of what's going on inside them. The act of disappearing is rarely born out of cruelty, it's often born out of chaos. A person who vanishes without warning isn't always heartless. Sometimes they are overwhelmed, trapped between emotions they can't name and fears they can't face. Imagine carrying pain for years without ever saying it out loud. Imagine pretending to be okay while drowning inside. Then one day your mind whispers, "Run." Not because you want to hurt anyone, but because staying feels heavier than leaving. That's how many people reach that breaking point. They don't plan it. They don't script it. It's like their soul suddenly shuts down. Their brain chooses distance over confrontation, silence over confession. Psychologists call it emotional flight. When the human mind senses threat, not always physical but emotional, it activates an ancient survival instinct. Fight, freeze, or flee. Some people fight to fix things, others freeze and wait for things to change, but those who disappear, they flee. They run to protect themselves from being seen too deeply, too truthfully. Many of these people grew up learning that silence was safer than honesty. Maybe as children, when they spoke up, they were punished. When they showed pain, they were ignored. So they learned to hide. They learned that leaving quietly hurts less than explaining their wounds. And so, even as adults, when things start to feel too real, when emotions become too intense, they repeat the same pattern. Vanish, escape, disappear. But let's be honest, it doesn't make it right. When someone walks out of your life without closure, it leaves a scar. It's confusing, it's unfair, it's deeply human to crave answers, but understanding why it happens can help you heal without them. People disappear for many reasons. Some are afraid of confrontation. They'd rather vanish than admit they made a mistake or can't meet expectations. Others disappear because they feel unworthy of love. Deep down, they believe they will disappoint you, so they leave before you can see their cracks. Then there are those who disappear because of guilt. They did something they can't face, so they choose distance instead of accountability. They hope time will erase the damage, even though silence often screams louder than words. But here's something powerful to remember. The way someone disappears says nothing about your worth. It only reveals their emotional limits. Their silence is not your reflection. It's their coping mechanism. There's another layer too. Some people vanish because they're trying to reinvent themselves. They outgrow a version of life that no longer fits. They walk away not from people, but from the identity that once defined them. It's like deleting a chapter to start over. It's selfish, yes, but also desperate. Because when your inner world is falling apart, sometimes disappearing feels like the only way to breathe again. When a man disappears, especially, society calls him cold, heartless, detached. But often, he's just exhausted. He's been told to be strong, to hide emotions, to man up. So he builds walls instead of bridges. When pain hits, he doesn't know how to talk about it. He only knows how to disappear. He'll go silent, turn off his phone, avoid everyone. Not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't know how to show that he does. Silence becomes his language of pain. But let's flip the perspective. If you have ever disappeared from someone's life, maybe not out of cruelty, but out of confusion, you probably know how heavy that silence can be, because even when you leave, a part of you stays behind. You think about the unanswered messages, the missed calls, the look on their face when they realised you were gone. Disappearing doesn't erase connection, it just delays the truth. We all crave connection, but we also fear it. The deeper we connect, the more vulnerable we become. And vulnerability, real emotional nakedness, can be terrifying. Some people disappear not because they want to, but because they can't handle being seen. They don't vanish into thin air, they vanish into their own fear. Now let's go deeper. Imagine the mind of someone moments before they disappear. There's confusion, anxiety, guilt. They scroll through a message, they start typing, and then they stop. Backspace. Delete. Their heart races. Their mind screams, "Just go!" And they do. They convince themselves it's better this way. If I leave now, no one gets hurt. But the truth? Everyone gets hurt. Silence doesn't heal. It haunts. Psychologists say disappearing gives a temporary sense of control. When life feels unpredictable, walking away gives an illusion of power. You decide when it ends. You decide when to stop feeling. But the feeling doesn't stop. It hides, and it grows. For men especially, disappearing is often rooted in emotional fatigue. When a man carries pressure for too long, expectations, failures, heartbreak, his nervous system starts to shut down. He retreats not because he's careless, but because he's collapsing. He stops replying. He stops explaining. He stops showing up, but inside he's screaming for peace. And yet there's another kind of disappearance that's even quieter. The emotional one. Some people don't leave physically, but mentally they vanish long before they walk away. You'll see it in their eyes. The light dims, the laughter fades. They're still there, but not really there. Why? Because they've detached. Detachment is the mind's defense when the heart can't handle more pain. It's like a shield. It keeps them safe, but also keeps them distant. When someone disappears from you, it's easy to blame yourself. Maybe you weren't enough. Maybe you said something wrong. But that's the trap. Disappearing says more about their inner storm than your outer worth. You can't heal someone who doesn't want to be seen. You can't chase someone who's running from themselves. So what do you do when it happens to you? You pause. You breathe. You remind yourself that closure doesn't always come in words. It sometimes comes in understanding. You learn to give peace to yourself, even when others refuse to give it to you. You stop asking why they left and start asking what you learned. Sometimes the lesson is strength. Sometimes it's boundaries. Sometimes it's realizing that disappearing people can't handle your kind of depth, and that's okay. You don't have to close every chapter with a conversation. Some chapters close with silence, and that's still an ending. But here's something beautiful. The ones who disappear often return, not always to reconnect, but to understand what they ran from. They come back when they've grown enough to face the parts of themselves they once feared. Sometimes they'll message you after months or years, and you'll hear those familiar words, "Hey, how have you been?" But you'll feel different, because time teaches you something they never could. People who vanish without closure carry their own punishment. They live haunted by the echoes of their silence. You, on the other hand, learn to live with truth. In the end, disappearing isn't about the distance between two people. It's about the distance within one person's soul. Every disappearance hides a story of fear, shame, unspoken pain. But also sometimes a story of transformation. Because not everyone who disappears does so to escape others. Some disappear to find themselves. They go silent to hear their own voice. They step away to understand who they've become. And maybe that's the paradox. Disappearing can be both destruction and rebirth. It can break a connection but also rebuild a person. So the next time someone disappears, remember there's a storm behind that silence. Not every silence means neglect. Not every absence means apathy. Sometimes it's just the sound of someone fighting their own demons quietly. And if you're the one who disappeared, maybe it's time to come back, not to the person, but to yourself, to face what you ran from, to speak what you couldn't before. Because healing doesn't happen in hiding, it happens in honesty. Disappearing might protect you for a while, but connection, real, vulnerable connection, is what saves you in the end. The truth is, everyone disappears at some point into work, into distraction, into silence. But only a few find their way back, stronger, wiser, ready to stay. If you've been left behind, don't wait for their message. Don't hold your breath for closure. Instead, whisper this truth to yourself. Their silence is not my fault. Their leaving is not my ending. Because in every disappearance there's one person who loses and one who grows. Be the one who grows, and when they finally look for you again, let them find someone who no longer needs answers, only peace. That's the real psychology behind people who suddenly disappear. Not mystery, not cruelty, but the raw human struggle of wanting to be seen while being terrified of being known. Sometimes people disappear not because they stopped caring, but because they never learned how to stay. They say people don't just leave. They drift, they fade, they vanish like smoke in the wind. But what truly disappears isn't a person. It's the version of them you once knew. Sometimes we meet people who are only passing through our story, not meant to stay until the end. And that's okay. Because every vanishing act teaches you something powerful about the human heart. People who disappear aren't always villains. They're often people fighting invisible battles. They don't always know how to stay, how to communicate, how to handle the storm inside, so they run. They run not to abandon you, but to escape themselves. And in that running, they leave behind confusion, pain, unanswered questions, but they also leave behind a mirror, one that reflects your own strength, your ability to heal, to let go, to move forward. The truth is, disappearance is never about rejection. It's about capacity. Some hearts just don't have the capacity to handle the depth of connection you bring. They don't know how to hold something real without feeling exposed. So they disappear not because you're too much, but because they're not ready enough. And one day you'll realize something important. You don't need closure from someone who wasn't brave enough to give it. You don't need an explanation from a person who couldn't face the truth. Because closure doesn't come from others. It comes from understanding. It comes from peace. It comes from saying to yourself, they left, but I stayed. They vanished, but I survived. It's strange, isn't it? The same silence that once broke you slowly becomes your strength. You stop checking your phone. You stop replaying conversations. You stop wondering what you did wrong. Because one morning you wake up and realize it was never about you. Their disappearance was their journey. Your healing is yours. And maybe one day they'll look back and remember you. Maybe they'll regret leaving. Maybe they'll type your name again, but never press send. And that's fine, because by then you'll be too far ahead. You'll be at peace. You'll understand that people come and go, but self-respect is what stays. So don't chase ghosts. Don't keep knocking on closed doors. Let people go where they need to go, even if that means they disappear without a trace. Because the ones meant for you won't vanish. They'll stay. They'll choose you even when it's hard. The psychology behind people who suddenly disappear is simple but painful. They're scared. Scared of being seen. Scared of failing. Scared of love that's real. But you're learning to face what they ran from. You're learning that love isn't proven by presence. It's proven by peace. So if someone disappeared from your life, smile. Not because you lost them, but because you found yourself. Because in the end, the strongest people are not the ones who never get left behind. They're the ones who never lose themselves no matter who walks away. And that's the real power. Not to hold on, but to heal. Not to chase, but to choose peace. Not to disappear, but to rise.